they clearly state that they would like to promote and attain an inclusive economic, socio-economic growth, and so on and so forth. But without strong institutions, without minimizing fragility, it will be impossible to be able to achieve this inclusiveness. Indeed, when you look at the book Why Nations Fail, it basically shows that without proper and effective institutions, you cannot move forward. And this fragility also leads to what you see in terms of migration of the youth out of the continent. And the UN estimated that almost 36 million Africans migrate out of the continent on an annual basis. The second area that I would like to focus on in terms of risk is the issue of drought, desertification, and climate change. If you look across the Sahel and the Horn of Africa, you see that part of the reason why, in addition to the issue of fragility, part of the reason why you have low agricultural productivity, you have low inclusiveness, low productivity, is essentially because people are being driven out of areas out of their rural communities where they cannot adapt in terms of growing more food, creating the issue of food security that was alluded to earlier on. So climate change, desertification, and drought is a major risk in terms of what needs to be looked at. And finally, the third one that I will mention is the issue of automation. It may not, maybe in some African states, it may not be a major thing, but in others, you have a situation whereby automation are likely going to disrupt job creation. They are likely going to disrupt the ability of people to also adapt to a growing economy. In essence, when manufacturing becomes more automated in some of our countries, it implies that low-skilled jobs will be lost. And this is a major risk. It's important to use automation to improve productivity, but at the same time, we need to focus more on creating low-skilled manufacturing base that will enable us to be able to absorb the growing population. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Yes, please. Before I break my rules, because I was going to turn to the audience next, I see there's a strong call for the mic here. But just to say, before you take the mic, when I turn to the audience, I also want you to interrogate what you have just heard. Some of the issues that have been raised, they're issues that face African countries and the continent, regardless of regional integration. I want you to put it in the context of, while we're pursuing this integration agenda of removing trade barriers, etc., how do we see these particular risks? And are they the right ones we should be focusing on? Do you think there are other far more important risks in that integration process that we should consider? So I'm going to turn to you in a minute, but just to put you on guard. Please.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. I'm going to build on what my predecessors have just analyzed. For me, the risk can be just summarized into one very strong term when it comes to economic transformation, inclusive growth, prosperity, and indeed sustainable development. For me, it's the resource cost, the paradox of the plenty. And the paradox of the plenty, to me, it cut across human resources and resource endowment. When it comes to human resources, it brings me to the second risk, which is very actually linked to that, is leaving many behind. Our motto is actually leaving no one behind. But because of that resource cuts and the paradox of the plenty, we're leaving more than the half of the population, the majority behind, that are women. And to actually bring those elements and dimension of the paradox of the plenty to bear, I just want to take agriculture. And the key element that there and determinant that actually are overlooked, are not brought to the mainstream regional integration policies, framework, and actually plan, which are, for example, if I take women, they actually constitute like more than 7% of the force. They are the constant of agriculture. My colleague has said it, but agriculture has a very unique contribution when it comes to transformation and industrialization. The whole value chain we are talking this morning and before do not make sense unless our agriculture is transformed. But what is happening now is, if we take just one specific thing, land, the whole land tenure, when it comes to women and the youth and the minority, actually does have negative externalities across the board. And let me just give you one figure, which I draw from we all know it, the report from FAO, that actually tells us that women actually don't have access to all those things, land and productive resources and so on. And the losses, the trade-off are the following. If they were given sufficient land and land tenure and productive resources, actually our productive agricultural productivity would have raised from 25 to 30%, with very important externalities on the food security, which will actually reduce by more than 30% in the over next decade. But more importantly, the overall total agricultural output that can actually lead to shaping regional integration would have actually increased by 2.5 to 4. And last but not least, food security would have actually be secure around 12 to 17% if you compare it to the other statistic, the statistic we had like 2 years ago or 10 years ago. What does it mean? It means that at the heart of that process of trajectory for change, we have the communities, we have women, we have youth, who actually are the game changer, whose knowledge, whose talents have not been harnessed fully, resource scarce. But at the same time, the paradox of the plant means we're not using the land properly. We're using the land to give it to those who have that political market, to those who have that outreach, and those who actually are the constant of change and transform a regional entity, we left them behind. What are the results? I will come back to that with some case studies and some practical examples. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Now, and I want my other panelists to know that they will have their time. I promise you that. But I want you in the audience. We have economists and policymakers in this room. Are these the issues we should be thinking about? I want you to give me your own ideas. Have we identified the right set of risks? And feel free to interrogate any member of the panel that have spoken so far. If you want further clarification on a point they have raised, this is your moment. I don't want to spend time listening to 5 panelists before turning to you. I want to draw on you as part of this process. What are your thoughts? So we have 2 hands there. Okay, I'll take the initial 4. So first with the gentleman over there, and then the madame in the red, and madame here. There was a hand before yours, sir. Okay, that gentleman, and we'll come to you. And please be as concise as possible. We don't want speeches. Very sharp, very practical.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Adebokola Adebusui from Nigeria. Now, we have listened to these barriers and risks that have been highlighted. But I believe that we have to look at the building blocks, which I believe will be barriers, widening exclusions, and causes of low productivity. In Nigeria, for instance, we have these barriers which could really widen the exclusions, seed grants and funds for farmers, especially women, and also land clearing. The issue of acquiring land is not really the problem, but clearing of the land, which is very, very exorbitant cost. At very exorbitant cost, we should visit this, and I'm sure this is exactly what is happening in other African states. So without these variables, resource variables, I think there's no trade. We have to consider this, and we have to, for us to have inclusive growth and for food security, these issues need to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your being very brief in making your point. Thank you so much. The gentleman over there standing.
I tend to agree with the last speaker that governance does matter. If you actually do map governance and the GDP per capita, or even the recently developed SDG index, you tend to find that those with poor governance actually have low scores in terms of the SDG index. So governance does matter. Institutions under that, it's well documented in evidence that institutions matter. So I tend to agree, but just to add a footnote, I tend also think if you join any economics class, you talk about factors of production. And these factors of production include land as a primary factor. Empirical evidence coming in from Uganda shows that land conflicts alone reduce agricultural output by 5 to 7% annually. And that is, and remember, this is a sector that we need to ride on. That is a strategic sector for foreign exchange, for employment. So I tend to think that we need to focus on that before we actually can address linkages and the structural transformation that is needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No one is going to get off very easily in this session, because if governance matters or fragility matters, we'll come back to what needs to be done and how that can be done in this regional integration process. I think, we all know these issues. I studied economics as well. We see the high correlation in terms of good governance and institutional development and national development, but what can we do about it in regional integration? So we'll come back to that. Madam. We have more mics in the room, or just the one? Oh, two. Okay.
Merci beaucoup. Ginette Camara du PNUD. En matière de risque, qui a parlé de la question de l'emploi. Effectivement, dans le processus des échanges, il y aura des destructions d'emplois, des créations d'autres. Or, les populations, on le sait, le taux de pauvreté en Afrique est élevé. Les populations sont déjà très fragilisées. Donc, ils sont capables de retomber rapidement dans la pauvreté pour peu que c'est leur secteur qui est touché par le processus de destruction d'emplois. Donc, quelles sont les mesures qu'on peut prendre en matière d'augmenter le système de protection sociale en matière d'assurance maladie ou bien d'accès au crédit? Comme ça, ceux qui perdent leurs emplois sont capables de se redéfinir, de recréer les nouvelles opportunités permises par l'intégration, qu'on mette à disposition les crédits facilement, qu'ils puissent profiter des opportunités. Le deuxième point que je voulais aborder en matière donc, de prévention des risques, de mitigation des risques, c'est que les États, on encourage que l'Union africaine mette en place un système qui favorise des joint ventures entre les entreprises des pays membres pour justement favoriser des créations d'emplois mutuels dans les pays et essayer de gérer les risques d'emploi, en particulier, comme l'a dit l'un des intervenants tout à l'heure, en particulier les emplois des personnes les moins formées qui sont les plus vulnérables. Merci.
All right, thank you very much. We'll go to this gentleman right here and then to you, sir. You will be next. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Khaled Hussein. I'm the Chief of Macroeconomic Analysis at the Economic Commission for Africa. I just have one point really here to highlight is about demographic dividends. We keep repeating this word, and I don't really see it coming in any of in ground. But what I really see on the ground is a demographic trap in Africa. No country is being excluded from the demographic traps. Small and large countries. I come from Egypt. Our population now exceeds 104. We have a serious problem. The population growth is 2.6%. So despite the progress that the whole continent did since 2000 up to now, but the population growth has eaten most of this progress. So when we talk about real GDP per capita, it is hardly shifted upwards. So I'm bringing this to you. When we talk about demographic, I think dividends, we should also talk about the other side. The other side, to me, is really more of a concern now before we bring the dividend issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the final one from the floor. I'll take note of you, sir, for the next round of questions.
Thank you very much. I'm Francis Sidiadia from the South African Reserve Bank. I totally concur with the last speaker but one. We must come up with practical solutions, in my view, as is the theme of this conference. My view is that we must consolidate what we have achieved. In some of the regions, if you take Kenya, for instance, in East Africa, in my view, they are doing very well because we have a challenge of unemployment, especially for the youth and for women. If you look at the concept of SACCOs in Kenya and other East African countries, for instance, because the main challenge is access to finance, amongst other things. You cannot integrate, you cannot alleviate poverty. So if we can be practical and we can consolidate and we can consult with each other, I think we can go very far. Because the main problem, in my view, is that as Africans, we are too dependent on grants and on aid. We have the numbers. If we can take advantage of the numbers that we have, there is no reason why we cannot alleviate poverty in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I see that eagerness to get to solutions, and we'll get there in a little bit. But I'll also give one of the other two members of the panel an opportunity to react to anything they've heard in terms of the risks. After which, I'm coming to Yeg here, because I know she's very much involved in some of the programs trying to address some of the issues. So I will switch to some of the programs and initiatives that are needed, and then some of the policy solutions. I think we can take note of the suggestion that came from the lady over here, and we'll come back to that when we start discussing solutions. What kind of social protection measures, what kind of loan schemes, financial schemes could be useful as part of the regional integration process to address or mitigate some of the risk we're discussing? So we're not forgetting that. We'll come back to it square on later in the conversation. But any member of the panel wants to respond to? Yes. And it's Isaac. Yes?
Thank you. I just want to respond to and raise also a risk sort of regarding the demographic dividend that we are right now talking about. First of all, when you talk of inclusiveness, you are actually referring to providing opportunities for everybody to achieve. And once you do that, then you'll have eradicated some of these problems. Two things. When you look at a population which is growing and bulging, and without the requisite skills to be able to exploit what's within the environment, you have a very big problem. When you look on the African continent, we have so many universities that have come up, and in some cases we have had some technical institutions, education institutions, that are supposed to empower and provide skills to the young population, being converted into universities. And when they are converted into universities, they will teach the general university education without equipping the skills. What our colleague here said, in terms of either demographic dividend or a demographic trap, can be resolved. And it's a very big risk on the African continent that we are doing less in terms of providing the skills to be able to equip the young people, and that's why they can be lured into all these sorts of things, into conflict. So that's one thing that I would like to bring out. Then the next one, which is a very big risk on the African continent. And this conference perhaps has not addressed this issue sufficiently. I see Africa to a certain extent being deindustrialized. What do I mean? We have regional integration that pursues rules of origin, that pursues non-tariff barrier reduction and tariff reduction, a very neoliberal approach, market-oriented, with very limited emphasis on industrialization. Most of the countries in the world that have reduced poverty and inequality to a certain extent have industrialized. So this is another area. When we get the economic partnership agreement, some countries in Africa have signed, others have not signed. And I can assure you, those who have not signed is because they feel this will deindustrialize. And I think this is something that we need to take head-on collusion to look at without any fear and favor. One person in a conference, I think it was a professor, said industrialization is actually a war. You are not going to take it with kid gloves. So I think this is something that we can take on that will help us. If you do any analysis, whether China, whether South Korea, as their manufacturer value added increased, their per capita income increased, and therefore their middle income increased and poverty went down. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Now, let us assume that we have identified these factors. We've said hunger and it's linked to agriculture and agricultural productivity. We've talked about the youth population and the need to ensure that we have adequate investment in our human capital for the future. We've talked about fragility and the link to good governance. We've talked about automation and many of these issues. Putting aside things that national governments need to do within their own borders, because countries need to invest in agriculture, they need to invest in human capital, etc. Thinking about it at the level of a continental process of integration that's exposing or widening or threatening these challenges or risks, what do we see as some of the good programs and initiatives? If we were to say to the chairman of the AU Commission or to some of these continental bodies that are working on this agenda of regional integration, that we see these risks, we would like you to consider these kinds of programs. What would those programs be? And I'm going to start by giving an opportunity to Yege. Then I come to you, and we'll start the questions from the floor with that gentleman later.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais faire ma communication en français. Donc, je vais laisser le temps aux auditeurs de mettre leur casque. Voilà, je voudrais tout d'abord remercier les organisateurs d'avoir associé notre centre Timbuktu Institute à cette réflexion. Alors, je vais aborder la question sous l'angle extrémisme violent, enjeu pour la stabilité et l'intégration régionale. Nous travaillons beaucoup sur cette thématique qui intéresse principalement les jeunes qui sont considérés comme l'avenir de l'Afrique. Il ne faut pas oublier que les jeunes sont aussi le présent de l'Afrique. Et c'est une chance de vitalité économique. Pour la plupart des économistes que vous êtes d'accord sur cela, mais ces jeunes sont une cible pour les groupes extrémistes violents. Ce qui fait donc un lien entre jeunes et radicalisation. Et si l'on s'intéresse, je vais y arriver, un peu à l'histoire, notamment aux années 70, avec le choc pétrolier qui a frappé la plupart de nos États et qui a coïncidé avec les terribles, je les qualifie ainsi, les terribles années de sécheresse des années 72, en plus des politiques d'ajustement structurel, ont eu principalement deux conséquences. Tout d'abord, la fin de l'État-providence, ensuite, la raréfaction des ressources financières. Et dans le même temps, ce boom pétrolier en fait, a profité aux pays du Golfe, lesquels pays sont devenus finalement les nouveaux partenaires privilégiés des pays du Sahel, alors que les partenaires européens étaient frappés par la crise. Et progressivement, en fait, on commençait à noter un certain endoctrinement qui était basé sur l'exploitation de la paupérisation des populations et des circonstances socio-économiques difficiles. Aujourd'hui, on est arrivé à un processus de radicalisation. Les jeunes se radicalisent, un processus qui fait objet à plusieurs interprétations. Parce que certains disent que la radicalisation serait le fruit d'une idéologie allant de la pré-radicalisation à la phase dite de l'identification pour arriver à l'endoctrinement avant d'atteindre la phase finale, c'est-à-dire le passage à l'acte, c'est-à-dire le fait de poser des actes terroristes. Dans le même temps, d'autres pensent que la radicalisation, en fait, c'est le fruit de circonstances socio-économiques difficiles, notamment à travers des facteurs attractifs, par exemple le désir d'une justice, entre guillemets, de facteurs incitatifs comme le chômage, la pauvreté, ou de facteurs de processus, c'est-à-dire l'ensemble des dysfonctionnements de l'État. Et qu'est-ce qu'on a noté à travers nos différentes enquêtes de terrain? Nous avons noté que la radicalisation serait finalement la manifestation de frustrations socio-économiques. Ceci est d'autant plus vrai que la toute première enquête que nous avions menée au niveau de la banlieue de Dakar, qui portait sur facteurs de radicalisation et perception du terrorisme chez les jeunes dans la grande banlieue de Dakar, a confirmé cette thèse. Il en est de même d'une autre enquête qui a été menée au niveau de la frontière avec la Mauritanie, plus précisément à Rosso, Sénégal. On a fait également la même enquête au niveau de la frontière avec la Guinée-Conakry, plus précisément dans les villes de Vélingara et Labé. Au Mali, la thèse s'est confirmée avec une enquête qu'on a faite avec les femmes de Bamako. Et la toute dernière enquête, c'était celle de Zender. Zender se situe au Niger. L'ensemble de ces enquêtes ont donné comme conclusion que les circonstances socio-économiques difficiles sont facteurs de radicalisation. Et ce qui nous ramène à trois remarques. La toute première étant que les jeunes, on a souvent affaire à des jeunes qui sont économiquement précaires, qui n'ont pas d'activité génératrice de revenus, mais qui sont familialement responsables, c'est-à-dire ils ont des enfants à charge, c'est des soutiens de famille, etc. La deuxième remarque, c'est que finalement l'extrémisme serait un engagement malgré soi. Parce que la plupart des jeunes nous disent qu'ils rejettent purement et simplement la radicalisation, mais ne nous cachent pas en fait leur volonté de rejoindre les groupes extrémistes. Et enfin, la dernière remarque, c'est qu'il y a eu une interpellation des organisations régionales. Parce que quand on leur pose la question de savoir vers quelles organisations vous tourneriez-vous ou seraient en mesure de résoudre le conflit lié à l'extrémisme, ils nous parlent des Nations Unies ou des pays étrangers à la place des pays africains, donc ce qui pose un certain problème. Et finalement, on remarque en fait qu'il y a une régionalisation progressive de la menace. Quand on fait le bilan des attaques de 2005 à 2015, plus précisément, on note une multiplication d'attaques terroristes au niveau de notre continent. Et ce qui, d'ailleurs, devrait ou attire l'attention de l'Union africaine, des communautés économiques régionales, de même que nos États au premier chef. Voilà. Et finalement, on est arrivé à une situation en fait où la menace s'accentue, ce qui nécessite en fait des efforts en termes d'intégration régionale et de mutualisation des efforts. Si je prends l'exemple de Boko Haram qui est un phénomène qui touche principalement le Nigeria, le Niger, qui sont des pays de la CEDEAO, et un tout petit peu le Tchad, qui est un pays de l'Afrique centrale. Et vous voyez nettement qu'une stratégie des pays de la CEDEAO ne parviendrait pas à contenir ce phénomène débordant parce que ça touche aussi l'Afrique centrale. Et c'était d'ailleurs la raison pour laquelle la Multinational Joint Task Force a été mise sur pied sous l'égide de la Commission du bassin du lac Tchad. Et quels sont les impacts maintenant de l'extrémisme violent sur l'intégration régionale? Tout d'abord, on note un certain durcissement des contrôles dû au risque transfrontalier, ce qui peut impacter les échanges économiques. Ensuite, on a une insécurité grandissante qui freine les activités transfrontalières. Je prends l'exemple des marchés qui ont été fermés au Mali, au Niger, ou le bannissement de certaines exploitations comme celle du poivron dans le bassin dans des îles du lac Tchad, à Difa, mais aussi au nord du Cameroun, notamment dans les villes de Garoua et Maroua. Et finalement, on arrive à un point où, à la place des dispositifs régionaux qui privilégient l'économie, on arrive à des initiatives en fait qui privilégient plutôt le volet sécuritaire. Je pense là au G5 Sahel. Et ce qui nous ramène à dire qu'il y a un défaut de cadre de coopération régionale, d'harmonisation en termes de lutte contre l'extrémisme violent, malgré que l'Union africaine est en train de s'efforcer sur ce point. Voilà, je vais m'en arrêter là en attendant les discussions.
Thank you so much. And I'm happy that in that latter part of the presentation, you brought it to concretely relate to the regional integration effort, because we know there are issues of terrorism and radicalization within nation states, but the implications for the regional integration initiative and how we need to respond to it through the lens of regional integration is something that I think we need to dwell a little bit more on. But I'll go to Dr. Temitope. I know you wanted to intervene, but I also wanted to come back to the issue you raised of good governance. Again, we can talk about good governance within country, but from the perspective of regional integration, where do you see the opportunities for us to look at this from that regional perspective and how it impacts on regional integration? So if you can also address that while you intervene, I think I would appreciate that. And I want to also come back to the audience to react to some of what you've heard already.
Very much. Most of these issues, the best way to look at them is to see them as regional public goods, not national public goods, which goes beyond the national public goods. If you take what is happening in Nigeria, on the last speaker mentioned Boko Haram. If you look at what is happening in central Nigeria, where you have people migrating from different parts of West Africa, especially the Fulanis, to Nigeria, and then partly because they are cattle rearers and nomads and so on, and partly because they do not have adequate resources in some of these countries, in some of the other countries, they are migrating towards central Nigeria, and this is creating a lot of conflict. If our national leaders see this issue that needs to be tackled in the form of a regional public good, then it is important that you have a collective action from the different countries and incentive to work together. It's the same thing with the issue of fragility and conflict and so on and so forth. They tend to spill over from one country to the other. The case of Boko Haram affects Cameroon, Chad, Niger, Nigeria, Benin, and so on. So the things that have worked well in terms of regional integration in Africa are those that are seen as regional public goods. So fragility should be seen as regional public good, and therefore requires an incentive for collective action. Now, if you look at the issue of HIV/AIDS in the 1980s, which was very, almost reaching endemic proportions, especially in Southern Africa. What was happening essentially was that there was migration between, easy migration between South Africa, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, and so on, Botswana, and so on and so forth. However, once it was seen that this was not just a national issue, that it's a regional public good that needs to be tackled, then there was collective action under the umbrella of SADC to be able to do something about it and then lessen this. Also in West Africa, if you look at the issue of river blindness in West Africa, it was seen basically, again, as a regional public good, that what affects people in terms of communicable diseases and so on and so forth in one part of West Africa will affect the other part of the sub-region. So it was tackled from a regional public good perspective. If you also look at the issue of polio, which Bill Gates Foundation has been involved in, they've been involved in polio eradication in northern Nigeria, in Niger, and so on and so forth. Again, when you have a functional approach to tackling regional public goods, you are more likely to make progress. If you look also the issue of stability and security across different parts of the continent, there are examples whereby when it is tackled as a regional public good, you are able to have stability. What happened in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, even in Guinea, it was approached under the umbrella of ECOWAS that if there is a security issue in Liberia, it can spill over to the neighbors and so on and so forth. So from a theoretical perspective, we need to look at it as a regional public good and then tackle it at the policy level by providing incentives for countries to act together. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think that's very nicely framed. Very nicely framed. Yes, Ngone.
And link it to the whole issue of institutions and effective regional integration institutions. And I think if we talk about capable state, when you bring it to the regional levels, you really find that we do have many plethora of institutions in all those areas, be it conflict, be it capacity building, and so on and so forth. But the thing of the matter is, they are not effective. Why? Yes, we have to say it. They are not effective. Why? Because the way even those institutions are built and the executive, the whole element that should make it work, that is actually the kind of political variable and dimension that actually is put to bear, which actually overlook the whole issue of efficiency and what it takes to actually make them work properly. And that it does have, it's costly to the public finance because they contribute and so on, but it's mainly costly in terms of tackling those issues which are prerequisite for efficiency in terms of regional integration, efficiency in terms of prosperity, efficiency in terms of transformation. So the key policy issue and question is that what should we do right now if we are serious about regional integration and more importantly implementing STVA to actually move away from the political dimension and angle of our institution, to actually bring institutions that work for the people, for the community, and bringing those who actually we are serving as part and parcel of the decision-making processes and the operationalization of those institutions. And I think that has been the missing link.
Thank you for that. So I'm going to go back to the audience now. So we're now looking at these issues of regional public goods. I think we can all generally acknowledge and recognize that these are not just matters that affect one nation state. But the issue has also been raised. We do have all these institutions, and very often they do not work or do not work very well. And we do know that private goods are more cherished than public goods. That's just the psychology of human behavior, the same way we discount the future in favor of the present. Within our organizations, we focus on the things within our initial domain, and then the public good dimensions, the regional dimensions. I can count how many regional programs are underfunded. Unless, of course, it's an emergency like young people crossing the oceans to reach Europe, and then it gets to national attention, international attention, and donors put money in it. Otherwise, it doesn't get attention or funding. So I do want us to spend some time. We have identified these public goods. What do we need to do to make sure that they're given the attention that they require, they're given the resources they require? How do we ensure that whichever of these issues we're dealing with, fragility, the youth demographic dividend, hunger, whatever these issues are, how do we ensure that in this phase of regional integration, we give them the appropriate attention they require? So ponder, think about it. I'm also going to ask some of the other members of the panel to respond to that, but I now go to the floor. Starting with that gentleman, and then Madame here, and I'll go on this side as well, a young man right here. So we start with those three. And Andy, I'd love to get your thoughts on some of these matters before you run away. I know you deal with some of the economic issues a lot, but I'd also like to tap your brain before you leave. So, yes, right here.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is John Struthers. I'm the Director of the Centre for African Research on Enterprise and Economic Development in Scotland. And my comment is not so much about the regional aspect, but the national aspect of some of these issues, and in particular, the role of educational institutions within certain African countries. And this ties into particularly the first point that Dr. Isaac made regarding skills of the youth. And we have a lot of experience in the UK of equipping graduates with entrepreneurial skills. And I'm aware of these in a number of other African countries, for example, in Kenya and in Ethiopia. For example, in some Kenyan universities, they offer graduate enterprise academy training, internships, and so on, with some success, for example, in agro-industry and extension services in the rural areas. So this is really a comment or a question in terms of what can educational institutions do within African countries to equip the youth to contribute back into the economy and prevent some of these negative things that we've been hearing about in terms of radicalization and so on. It's a challenge, but we have to start somewhere, and this, if you like, might be what we sometimes call part of the circular economy, i.e. sort of paying back into the society on the part of youth, or any part of the population for that matter, but particularly with regard to the youth. Thank you.
Very much. The Madame here, and if you wonder why I'm putting Andy on the spot, he's a director of the UN ECA, Economic Commission for Africa, based here in Kigali, but the ECA is, of course, advising the African Union on a lot of this integration agenda, so I'd love to tap your brain, Andy. That's why I'm putting you a little bit on the spot. Madame, where is she? Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for what I think have been very interesting interventions. My name is Atia Waris. I'm from the law school at the University of Nairobi. I'm more interested in solutions that are not just regional, but also domestic sometimes. And the reason I ask that is if you look at where we're looking at inequality or inclusiveness, it's who do we want to include? And we've talked about the youth. We've talked about the women, but there are also refugees that are a real critical issue on the continent on issues of inclusivity. And then we also have to look at issues of the disabled. And I'd like to use the definition we have in Kenya of the common person, and the common person is a